Okay, today we're going to talk about bass, if that wasn't obvious. One of my favorite things to mess with in the studio is bass. Absolutely love bass tones. And this setup that I've got going is kind of my go-to here, and we're finishing up some new tracks, and I have what I think is kind of a tasty tone and a fun setup, so I thought I'd just share that with you guys. So it's a combination of an Ampeg rig, got a good old classic 4x10, the SVT 400T, which actually belongs to a good friend of mine, Minnow Verboten. Is that it? We're done? Okay, she's had enough. That intro wasn't good enough for her. So the SVT 400T, this actually belongs to my good buddy Minnow Verboten, but it sounds great. And then over here, I have the venerable Polytone Mini Brute 3, which I absolutely love. Between these two amps, I can get pretty much any sound that I'm looking for, and quite often, like today, I'm running them together, and that's what I think is kind of cool, because they're two entirely different tones. Mic-wise, this is also probably my go-to mic setup to start with on bass, which is a Roswell Pro Audio Colaris and a Heil Sound PR30. So I've got the condenser and the dynamic. The Colaris has a nice big round tone, and you can push into the transformer and get grit from the mic if you want, and the PR30 is nice and focused. So my mic placement on this particular sound that I'm going to play you today is the PR30 is directly in the center of the dust cap. And the Colaris, and this is something I experimented with quite a bit, I'm kind of splitting between the center of the dust cap down here on the bottom right speaker and the horn right here in the middle. And I found a spot that just had a nice blend between the two that I really liked. But these two mics capture a bit different focus of the cabinet, and I think they work really well together. And that's why this has been a go-to mic setup for me for quite a while. We have something different on the Polytone, which we'll get to in just a second. I do have a few pedals on top up here. Let's take a look at those. First off, this is a reamp session. If you want a more in-depth video of the reamp setup that I use here at the studio, I'll put a link down in the description or somewhere in the field here to a recent video that is all about the reamp setup here. But this is a reamp session today. I'm using the Radial JCR Studio reamper. That is feeding the Radial headlight, and this is how I'm splitting the signal between the two amps. So I have one feed going to these pedals on the front end of the Ampeg, and I have another feed here that is going over to the Polytone Mini Brute we'll get to in just a second. The tone I'm getting for the Ampeg, I am using a little bit of this Boss EQ, just pulling some 120, and that's feeding the Ampeg Scrambler Bass Overdrive. Really digging this. I like to call it the Skip Scrambler. See who's going to get that reference.
The Skip Scramble, an egg dish that contained everything on the menu.
But I really dig this pedal. You can go full crazy crunch with it, or like what I'm doing today is just adding a little bit of bite, and that's it. Because the Polytone over there, which we're going to get to in a second, is where all of the crunch is coming from for the sound today. I do have Zounds affiliate links down in the description for this good old pedal, as well as the reamp box here. They're cool, I highly recommend them. So let's go take a look at the Polytone Mini Brute that's on the other side of this panel right here. Now on to one of my absolute favorite amps, and that is the Polytone Mini Brute 3. This amp on its own is absolutely bitchin', but what I'm doing to it today is running an Electro Harmonics Big Muff and fuzzing the crap out of it. This is the character amp. And if you use the Ampeg for all the meat and the low, this just kind of tucks in right in the center of the sound and cuts through a mix. And that's what you're going to hear today. For a mic, this changes a lot. And in this case, since it's not the main beef of the sound, I'm using an AKG D1000E, and it is directly in the center of the dust cap. Let's go in the control room and have a listen. What we're going to listen to here is the tracking session and not the final mix, so you'll get to hear it exactly what it sounded like once all the recording was done. So let's start by going through the Ampeg sound, and here is what the Colaris sounds like. You can hear that little bit of bite coming from the scrambler pedal, which is really cool. And the Colaris, one of my favorite mics on bass. It's got a nice full round tone, but it's also very present even with low end information. Here's the PR30. Little bit different vibe there, and these work really well together. So I'm going to pull these down to kind of the blend that I had while we were tracking. And here are the two together. And I used a bit more of the Colaris than the PR30. All right, so that's the Ampeg sound. Now let's get to the fun stuff. This is the Polytone with the big muff. One thing I like about using that amp, like I said earlier, is when you run like a big muff or distortion on it, because it's just a single speaker, the low end still stays kind of tight. You can still hear bottom end in there, but it's really focused. Now when we blend these three together, let me pull this down to kind of where I had it for the tracking. Here is what our three mics sound like together. Again, just the Ampeg. Add in the Polytone. And I was going for texture with this. I wanted the bass to have like cut. Here, I'm gonna add just the guitars in, and I'll start with no Polytone and I'll add that in. It's just kind of like this saw in the middle just kind of punching through the guitars, and that's kind of what I was going for. I wanted that bass to have a texture all its own. So now let's take a listen to all of this together. So here is, I'm just gonna loop the chorus real quick. I'm gonna turn the Polytone on and off so you can hear just like kind of typical bass sound, and then with the added big muff. It doesn't sound bad without it. It's actually kind of a nice bass tone, but it didn't have the character that I wanted. And I like the combination of those two amps. It's quite versatile, actually. So that's a little taste of the bass sound and setup for this particular song. Once this stuff is out, I'll have another little breakdown of the mix of this one, and I'll let you all know. So thanks for joining me on this video. Appreciate it. Go make some music. See you in the next video. Peace.